Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire. I just want to do something really quick and different. So I'm making a book video. I'm a Latin teacher and I love talking about ancient Rome. I love it in my board games, I love it in my movies, and I love it in my books. And so I thought actually what I would do is make 5 really, really good historical fiction recommendations of books that are about Roman history. So I hope that you enjoy this, and I also hope you get some good reading recs from it. I could probably do an entire other video of these. I'm just picking 5 because 5 is quick, and I'm not going to really list these in any particular order, but these are all great, and these are all books I've really, really enjoyed. So I'm just going to start with the obvious. If you haven't read it yet, go read I, Claudius by Robert Graves. It's actually a 2 parts story in book form. So there's I, Claudius, and then there's Claudius the God. So the miniseries, if you watch the BBC miniseries, which is also great, covers both books, but it's actually 2 books, and they're fantastic. I read it for the drama, and I read it, actually, you know, you can't totally trust it, but you'll learn a whole lot about Roman history, or at least what the historians say, from reading Robert Graves. He's basically taking some of the gossip that's reported by real Roman historians like Suetonius and turning it into this really compelling novel. And so I think I, Claudius is great. You know, maybe you don't have the same read on Claudius as actually a good person that Robert Graves presents in I, Claudius, but you can't help but enjoy the story. And if you want to know all the power players and what people suspected about them in the actual time of the early Roman Empire under Augustus and then his Julio-Claudian dynasty, then really I, Claudius is fantastic. I knew what the Battle of Teutoburg Forest was because I read I, Claudius. I knew things about Locusta the Poisoner because I read I, Claudius. And so basically my knowledge of Roman history when I read this book as a kid grew while I was also super entertained. So do a little bit of fact checking, and you know, presentation is not always accurate, but I, Claudius is a super compelling read. It's so fun, it's so dramatic, and you'll really have a good understanding of the time period and who everybody is. So if you really like something like I, Claudius, but maybe you want to go a little bit further back in history, maybe you want to read about the lead up to Augustus and to the main players of I, Claudius, then I actually recommend, okay, this is cheating, it's not a book, it's a series. It's a series of big chunky books. You should read Colleen McCullough's Masters of Rome series, starting with The First Man in Rome. So this is a whole series of very, very big books, but it is worth it. I highly recommend them. Go to the library and get them. I don't know that they're in print right now, but they're gettable in like used bookstores and libraries. So the Masters of Rome series begins with a book about Marius when he's sort of the greatest man in Rome, or getting there, and then his early encounters with Sulla before they become mortal enemies, before there's a huge civil war in Rome. And also, you know, Julius Caesar starts to show up in the series and becomes a main player later. So these books are great because they really do contain a lot of history. You're going to learn a lot while you're reading them, but oh man, it doesn't feel like you're learning. It is a lot of drama, murder, sex, politicking, you know, basically everything that you really need in a good story about Rome is in this series. And I love that McCullough covers kind of like late Republic period leading up to Julius Caesar before including him, because I feel like it's really easy to write about Caesar, but I can't think of as much good literature about Marius and Sulla. And so if you want to really get a good sense of the lead up to the Roman Empire and the messiness and the political breaks and the wars that kind of got the Romans there, then Masters of Rome is a fantastic series to read, in addition to just being super entertaining. If you want to read something that's sort of contemporary with the events of I, Claudius, I must recommend Feast of Sorrow by Crystal King. So Feast of Sorrow is a wonderful, wonderful book because it focuses on kind of how a slave in Rome might understand things. And so, you know, one thing we don't talk about a lot is that the Romans built their society on the back of slave labor. It is gross, but it's a historical reality. So what Crystal King does is she tells a story from the point of view of a slave who is purchased to be the chef of Apicius, who was a known gourmand and very luxurious liver in Rome. And so it's the course of life of this man who is forced into service, but he also has a really important career and a really important role among the elite because of his ability to cook and to run a kitchen. So you learn a lot about politics from sort of the upstairs portion of the story, but then you also learn a lot about the lives of slaves, Roman food, and all kinds of stuff from sort of the downstairs portion of the novel. And it's just a really compelling read. I still remember it, having read it several years ago. It actually might be due for a reread. But it's a really good one, especially if you're interested in a perspective of this like grand time in ancient Rome from somebody who was on the bottom of the social ladder as opposed to the top. So now I'm going to talk about two more books. These are a bit later. The first one I want to talk about just has the best title. It is called A God Strolling in the Cool of the Evening. And it is by Mário de Carvalho. He is a Portuguese author who writes about Lusitania, which was the Roman name for the area that is now Portugal, and a magistrate, or a former magistrate, who is looking back over his life and thinking about how he tried to be involved in some political affairs in his town that he doesn't really feel attached to anymore. He's left. How he feels about his life, his wife, how he spent his time, but he also looks back on kind of this obsession that he has with a woman who is a Christian and kind of his encounters with a Christian cult. It sounds weird to say that, but to the Romans that would be, like an outbreak of Christianity in the city where he was once in charge. And I love the book because it's kind of slow. It's not super dramatic, but it's a really lovely character story. Like looking at how this man sees the world and how he perceives Christianity as a Roman. I think that De Carvalho did a very, very good job of trying to capture that aspect of Romanness in a way that's compassionate and charming and meditative. And it's just a very, very good read. I loved the book. It was an absolute keeper, and it's still on the shelf because I just think it was great. And then I said I wasn't going to do these in any particular order, but I am going to mention at the end that my very favorite novel of ancient Rome is Julian by Gore Vidal. And I absolutely love Julian because I feel like it's just such a clever book, but it also means a lot to me. So Julian is also known as Julian the Apostate. He was the last pagan emperor of Rome. He was raised Christian, and he went back to pagan ways and tried to bring them back to Rome, but it was really too late, and there was no way he was going to be changing society the way he thought he was going to. And it doesn't help that he died very young in a war. So Julian is actually a collection of correspondence between two philosophers who knew Julian and had seen him kind of as their great hope. And so they are pagan philosophers who are watching their way of life just die. It's getting choked out by Christianity at this point, both politically and ideologically, on the ground. So they're looking back to kind of like the last time they felt hope for their own future, of their own kind of way of seeing the world. They talk about Julian, what he meant to them, his foibles, and his greatness. But it's also just a really interesting book about religion and politics. And it's also an interesting book about, I guess, being on the losing side of history and how that feels. And, as somebody who is quite secular myself, I really keenly felt a lot of the difficulties that the philosophers were feeling. And I think that the book is just a really great meditation on how it feels to feel like your point of view is dying out. I also liked it because Gore Vidal is just very clever. Like, this man knew his classical history, and so some of the affectations, their ways of talking, their little jokes and references, if you like classics, there's like a lot of extra juiciness in there, so of course I loved that. But even if that's not your thing, I think Julian is worth a read because it's just got such an interesting correspondence between people talking in the ancient world and then topics that are meaningful in the modern day still. So Gore Vidal was a smart dude. He was sassy, shows up in his work, and he knew his classics too. So those are 5 books that I think are really, really good about the Roman Empire. And you don't have to actually read any nonfiction to get there. You can just sink into a story and check it out. So I recommend that you do. If you've read any of these, let me know what you think. If you have other books that you think I should read, I might have read them already, but I still want to hear it. Make a suggestion in the comments. And happy reading today.